I reckon there's 14 weeks to go. If you're wondering what it is, it's to the 23rd of June, the referendum vote. Matt Cole, political expert, joins me. Matt, good morning to you.
Morning, Bob.
14 weeks. We've had, what, 10 days of it, or 2 weeks of it, whatever it is so far. Are we in danger of getting oversaturated with this?
It does look as though the politicians themselves are starting to suffer from campaign fatigue, never mind the rest of us. When you think about a general election campaign, 6 weeks is a long time, 4 weeks is more normal. We're looking at 2 or 3 months to go to this vote, and it's becoming already disturbingly personal and speculative and negative. And what the politicians have to do is find a way of getting across to us with campaigning on the ground and perhaps handing some of the campaigning over to less political figures.
The day after it was announced, we went out in the streets here to talk to people and see what they thought. And the overriding comment from everybody was, I don't feel I know enough about it. It's not that I don't want to vote, I do want to vote. I don't know whether to vote yes, I don't know whether to vote no, because they didn't know enough about the implications. Is that, would you have thought, a fair assessment of how people feel?
I'm sure they do feel like that. There's at least 25%, possibly as many as a third of the public who have no idea how they're going to vote. Some of them no idea whether they're going to vote. And understandably, this is a huge institution that we're deciding about. The European Union is a unique, vast and elaborate set of institutions that people couldn't possibly hope to understand in full detail, and that for that reason they may feel a little bit suspicious of our relationship with. What the campaign ought to do, and I think what it did in 1975, was make people feel that they had a basic understanding of what the broad benefits and disadvantages were. We don't need to understand every last nut and bolt of how the European Commission works. However, we do want to know what we're getting out of it and what we would be able to abandon as a commitment if we left the European Union. In the end, I don't think it's going to be one of those decisions that we make by a rational calculus of figures, partly because it's not possible to know what would happen if we leave. The speculative nature of the campaign is to some extent unavoidable. Nobody's ever left the European Union. We haven't been outside it for over 40 years, and it was a very different institution when we joined. So I can understand people wanting the information, and I hope they will get it through the campaign. In the end, though, I suspect the decision will be as much one of the heart as of the head. The information will be used to decide how we feel about it.
If we come out, are we going to be isolated in trade, financially, which are obviously going to be the major factors, aren't they?
Well, here's one of the speculative areas. Of course, we do a huge amount of our trade in goods and particularly in services with the European Union. And in the West Midlands, we can point to motor manufacture, we can point to education as an area of export through programmes like the Erasmus scheme. We can look at the benefits that we gain from the European Regional Development Fund, for example. You only have to look down Broad Street to see what was built with that and what's going to be done with HS2. And the investments that have been made in a number of other smaller business projects. However, we don't know how much of the trade we would lose. It's clearly in the interest of the Project Fear, as their opponents call them, David Cameron's campaign to remain in, to emphasise the potential losses. And that's what's made the very negative nature of the campaign so far. It's in the interest of European Union partner countries to emphasise the scepticism they would have towards us, and perhaps it might be in their interest to act on that if we left. However, the Leave campaign will say to us, companies that want to deal with us will still want to deal with us. Companies that want to buy from us will still want to buy from us. And the main question we have to ask is not whether we will continue doing that trade, but really on what terms. We would lose the benefit of the single market with no taxes. And there might be a danger that future British governments could tax goods from abroad, or that foreign countries could tax goods coming out of Britain. We don't know whether that would happen, and that's one of the decisions of the heart we have to make.
Are you surprised how politicised it's become so soon?
In terms of party politics, it's become very politicised in terms of internal party politics, actually. The Labour Party is reluctant to be enthusiastic about the project at all. Jeremy Corbyn has decided eventually that he wants to back our membership, despite some misgivings, but is doing it rather unenthusiastically. The Conservative Party clearly is deeply divided, as we always knew it was, and that has become a quite personal dispute in the case of some former close cabinet colleagues. I don't think that's very helpful to informing the public, and I hope that that's the early sparring stages of the campaign rather than the campaign running into the ground. If it becomes an argument amongst colleagues and friends in the government, it will not inspire the public.
Because I'm thinking if people are looking at it and they think, well, broadly I would back what Ian Duncan Smith said to me and John Whittingdale and Michael Gove and people like this. If people look at it from that point of view, they're less likely to make what you might call a rational decision, aren't they?
In the end, because there is an element of speculation in this, and because the information is endless, and even the most enthusiastic European analyst would tire of it in 6 weeks of campaigning, there will be a judgment partly based on trust of the people who are recommending one side or the other. And interestingly, in 1975, there was a strong weight of opinion in favour of staying. The leaders of the TUC, the leaders of the CBI, all three leaders of the main political parties, including Margaret Thatcher, were recommending yes. The no vote was made up of Enoch Powell, Michael Foot, and what one might call the more peripheral elements of the political spectrum. I think that's less true this time. British public opinion is more balanced, 50-50, about where we're likely to go as far as we can tell. There's probably a larger element of the unknown, at least as large anyway, and we have very senior cabinet ministers arguing on both sides. We have leaders of the business community, the leader of the Chambers of Commerce, for example, arguing that there could be benefits to leaving. And therefore, I think the balance of debate is going to be more even than it was in 1975. If people look for figures to trust, it's not quite as obvious a decision as it was in 1975.
How do you think the powerhouses and the decision makers in Europe are looking at this country at the moment? The fact that we're going to have a referendum?
They're looking at it with great concern, because for Britain to leave would be a major blow for the European Union. Not only would it be the first time that a country had left, one of the major contributors to the European budget would leave, one of the earliest members of the European Union would leave, and one of the most significant players in international relations would be leaving. And it would set off Euroscepticism even more fiercely in other countries, and the demands for potentially renegotiation and re-examination of European treaties might start to unravel. So there will be an eagerness to make sure that David Cameron has the best possible chance of keeping us in. There are, of course, some European leaders who have begun to tire of Britain's constant demands for a special status. And I think that phrase probably will stick in the craw of some of the European leaders. But they will keep their counsel for the time being, and they will do their very best to either warn us of the consequences of leaving or to try to advertise to us the benefits of staying.
Because a lot of people within Europe, I suspect, are probably not too pleased that we've never adopted the euro, that we've stuck to our own currency.
Yes, and it's interesting that whilst it's often said that the European Commission can get us to do anything it wants, in fact, when a national leader or our national parliament stands out against something, it's usually been possible to remain out of the major changes, such as the formation of the single currency. It's taken a good deal of effort and the right circumstances. But they have understood that. They understood it with Denmark. There are a number of the newer countries in Eastern Europe that haven't joined the euro. That possibility of keeping all the countries in the single currency or having them all join, I think has been set aside. What they don't want is a regressive pattern in which countries now start to withdraw from the arrangements they previously had. And even some of those things that David Cameron won in the negotiations recently, it was emphasised were pan-European agreements. The one about child benefit, for example, will apply to all countries.
So if we were to come out, yes, a lot of European countries wouldn't be too pleased, and you've already said that we could still trade and still do things as before. For those who would be left in, the other 26 countries, would they be thinking, it's a shame that we haven't got Britain in there, or would they be saying, well, you know, they've always been a bit awkward, so, well, let them paddle their own canoe?
Well, there would be a range of opinions, as you can imagine, and some will be expressed more publicly than others. The interesting thing about the reaction of other countries is that other countries not only are made up of 27 different member states, but of both state and business interests in those countries. Doubtless the state leaders would wish to make it clear that any country that leaves is going to suffer some consequences as a result of it, and indeed the French have begun to say that already. They would not wish to make it seem that it was easy to leave the EU should we do that. On the other hand, businesses might still want to trade with us as before, and it is not possible for national governments to order businesses not to trade with Britain. They will act on their commercial interests. So the Leave campaign will be stressing that the economic benefits are not controlled by politicians. The economic benefits are determined by markets, and markets will still want to maintain an element of trade with Britain.
UKIP, of course, their whole reason for being is that they're anti-Europe. If we stay in, is it the end of UKIP's credibility and of Nigel Farage?
Nigel Farage's credibility has already taken a couple of knocks from the general election, but UKIP itself clearly would lose its central raison d'etre, which was to call for a referendum, and in that referendum to call for us to leave. If we were to stay, UKIP at the very least would have to change its purpose, and its purpose then would be, rather as the purpose of Eurosceptics became after 1975, at least for a number of years, probably a generation, to argue not for an immediate referendum and departure again, but to argue for restraining and reforming and monitoring the operation of the European Union. They would see themselves still as having a role, and of course there would still be, as seems likely, at least a third and possibly half of the public who would have expressed the desire to leave. That portion of public opinion won't go away, and it deserves a legitimate expression. It simply won't be able to demand a Leave campaign again.
So let's take the view that an awful lot of people who are watching at the moment and are reading things don't know what to vote, how to vote. With as impartially as you can, what would you say, right, these are the reasons why people might vote yes, and these are the reasons why they might vote no?
One of the disconcerting things about the campaign is that both campaigns seem to be saying the same thing about the same subjects. Very much they're focusing on the economy, understandably, because that is the immediate concern of the largest possible number of people. They are both claiming that there will be more jobs if you leave or stay. They are both claiming that goods and services will be more inexpensive if you leave or stay, depending on the campaign. There are arguments for making both those claims, and that will be a difficult speculative question to unpick. But clearly, what you believe will happen to the economy will be an important part of this. The so far unexplored question, by and large of the campaigns, is of course immigration. And immigration is a major concern of many members of the public. The campaigns have found it difficult to raise that without raising the temperature of the debate inappropriately, as they would see it. However, that will doubtless be in the minds of some members of the public because just as many jobs rely on our membership of the European Union, in many people's opinion, our borders are necessarily more open because we're in the European Union. Last of all, there is the question of our accountability, of the accountability of government. And that's the more abstract question that it's difficult for the public to assess. We have given up sovereignty over our laws as a result of being in the European Union. No one can dispute that. European Union law is superior to English law. When a European Union law supersedes an English law, we have to live by it, even if Parliament has decided something different. However, we gain benefits from that that we might otherwise not have. And this is what I think is the core of the debate about Europe, and it's a very abstract and in some ways difficult thing to get our heads around. Although we've given up the right to make laws, and for example, over the last 20 years there have been dozens of occasions when the Council of Ministers has imposed laws on Britain that we didn't like, there have been thousands of occasions where we've passed laws about the roaming charges of phone companies, about the environment, about trade, that we couldn't possibly have passed without the European Union, that give us control over our own affairs. Do you want to have complete legal sovereignty, or do you want to have shared political control? That's the debate we have to think about.
And all of which is to say nothing, that we will, just in a sentence. The Sun yesterday morning, their big picture of the Queen saying that she was in favour of us exiting. It's put some pressure on Michael Gove. Nick Clegg was the one as well. Where do you see that going?
This is part of the debate, which is the campaign has now become about the campaign. It's about who said what. It's like one of those personal arguments in which you quickly forget what the substance of the argument was, and you start to argue about how the argument's being conducted, who gave who a funny look, and who used the wrong language. Hopefully that will be dissipated soon enough. It demonstrates the ferocity of opinion in all of this, but I don't think it helps the public. What we need to do is get down to campaigning on the ground, informing about the issues, and coming to a decision with as many people as possible participating.
We have to leave it there. Matt Cole, thank you for joining us.